Namaste and in la catch, and welcome to this episode of One World in a New World. I'm your host, Zen Benefiel, and as always, please like, subscribe, share, comment, do all those necessary things that you do on podcasts because that's what helps us grow and keeps you informed. Also, I just recently published a new book called Planetary Citizens, Awakening the Heart in Humanity. You can get that as a free download at planetarycitizens.net. So thanks so very much. Now, this week's guest is Joe Weston. He is an amazing gentleman. He just moved from the Americas to the Netherlands. He is an author. His book, Fierce Civility, is something that we all need to have in these times. I recommend reading it. His other book is called Mastering Respectful Confrontation. And we're all dealing with a lot of things in life right now. We need to learn how to navigate them effectively. It's a great resource. He's the founder of Weston Network. He is an executive coach, and he's also an adjunct professor at Georgetown University, the School of Government. So this is going to be a phenomenal conversation. Don't go away. We'll be right back.
Explore the thoughtless sphere. Embark on a life-changing journey of self-discovery. Embrace harmony with self, with others, with Earth. One world in a new world. Zen Benefiel skillfully ignites conversations, guiding guests to reveal personal journeys and perspectives. Listeners are inspired to seek knowledge and find wisdom in their own lives. Join this transformative journey as we navigate the depth of human experience.
Joe, it's so great to have you here. I've been looking forward to this. We scheduled it several weeks ago, and you're just one of the guys that I love to talk to. So thanks for coming on with us.
It's an honor to be here. I'm looking forward to speaking with you too. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, and as we explore the deeper side of life. We've got two lives that we live, an inner and outer. Both of them are usually separate. We're seeking to merge those, which is how I believe we're designed. But we've had challenges in doing that for whatever reason, and we've been looked upon as being odd, weird, maybe insane, because the kinds of stuff that we experience inside is a bit different, and it's hard to articulate sometimes. And it's nevertheless exciting when it happens. So understanding that, Joe, I know just based on what I know of you, your work, having a brief conversation with you before, you're a deep guy. You've had to have had some early introductions to this interconnectedness that we're talking about. What was that like?
It's a great place to start. Go to the cosmic right there. I love that.
Well, and the
Yeah,
early connection, right?
yeah. No, so I grew up in New York City, and I'm very proud. I grew up in Queens, Flushing, Queens, and uh, it really resonates with me, and it really is part of who I am, and it's part of my story.
Well, we're
And
certainly not flushing the queens now, are we?
no, we're not flushing the Queens. No, we're definitely not
We're
doing that.
elevating
No.
them, I think.
Yes. That's so much to say about that. Feminine principle, look, I do all of that. As you mentioned, my work is called Fierce Civility and Respectful Confrontation, and I've done a lot of work in conflict zones. And people ask, why are you so attracted to conflict? And I say, it's not that I'm attracted to conflict, but just being a New Yorker, every day living in New York was an examination of conflict and confrontation.
Sure.
So in essence, I've been in it, and I came from a pretty volatile childhood, sometimes violent. So I was able to experience firsthand to
The
survive that.
recognition, too, that something doesn't feel right here.
Yeah. Well, to first the survival aspect of it, and then to also feel that that I'm observing it, and that's, I guess, the first step, Zen, I would say, is that a disconnect, right? And I think a lot of people's stories is feeling not part of the family and not home and feeling
Sure.
disconnect, which gave me the
But is that
object.
a disconnect, though? Pardon me the interruption, because I think we misperceive the disconnection. It's part of that observer self that comes forward that we
Yeah.
eventually realize, wow, this is a really good tool to have.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification, because actually from my Buddhist practice, you never talk about detachment, you talk about not being attached, that there's a
Right.
difference.
Right.
So yes, so I wouldn't say disconnection, but I guess a disconnection from the drama, from that
Yeah. Yeah.
aspect of
Yeah.
it, where that did actually give me the opportunity to observe. Luckily, it was a survival mechanism.
Mm.
And one of the things that I would observe is I would just study and I would ask the question, why is it, even though we know better, even though we're a relatively intelligent species, why do
Right.
we still have
We think
arguments?
anyway,
We
right?
think we still have arguments and fights, and on a larger scale, crime and war and hunger. So
Right.
even as a boy, I was asking these questions. There's something that doesn't make sense here. It's a disconnect. And and also my parents were not very religious, but culturally religious and not really understanding, not really seeing that, but always feeling in my heart that I was connected to something larger than myself.
Hmm.
So that that was also a survival mechanism. And that took me on my life's journey, I guess. And it was an important moment as a young man where someone said to me, they said I was pretty wound up. Joe, you need to meditate. And I'm like, oh, I couldn't meditate. I couldn't sit still that long. And they said, what about Tai Chi? That's like meditation in motion.
Hmm.
And I went and did a Tai Chi class, and that changed everything. I really
It's
understood.
so, flowing and fluid, and it gives you that opportunity to just feel and move in that sensation rather than the thinking, right?
Yes.
It's funny where there's a Greek word, thetan, Thetan, means
Yeah.
thinker.
Yeah.
And I had this really weird idea in college. I'd had an experience that left me questioning a lot of things, and one of them being where we got the word Satan from, because I felt like I
Mhm.
was being one, because I was totally outside the religious framework that I had been brought up in, and still felt like it was true. And so I went to the university library, and they have these, A through L and M through Z, really thick
Yeah.
dictionaries, right? And the very first reference was the Greek thetan, meaning thinker. And I thought, wow,
Yeah.
it could have had a V8, right? And then it made so much sense. We are our own adversary.
Yeah. We are our own adversary. Or the name could have also come from certain religions that wanted to not have us think for ourselves
Well, that's where
and
it
to
eventually
realize,
got
yeah,
construed to,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
But the
yeah.
Greek came before and it's like, oh, wow, yeah, we can spin this and use it and manipulate people with a fictitious enemy.
Right. Right. And not seeing that, and just like anything, and there's enormous power in self-awareness.
Yes,
I call it courageous self-reflection, that's an important part of our development, is that
absolutely.
because it requires courage to really honestly look. It's easy to look outside of yourself, but to look within is what you're saying, the inner and the outer. And that's what the Tai Chi eventually brought me, as you were saying. It helped me understand the relationship between the inner and the outer, the
Hmm.
relationship of the yin and the yang, of flow and balance. And I actually had a moment based on what you're saying. I remember walking through the streets of Manhattan, still a young man, and actually for the first time I thought, hmm, how many negative thoughts do I have in a day?
Oh,
And I
wow.
started tracking out of nowhere. I just thought this. No one in my world ever would ask this question. And I started tracking and I said, wow, about 90% of my thoughts were negative.
Hmm. One
And
of
then
the things that it's, 70,000 thoughts a day, 90% of them. How many thoughts are self-deprecating? And just
yeah,
being aware of those gives you the opportunity to change them.
yeah, yes. So that gave me the opportunity to change them, and which I slowly did, which slowly I think I could say, and I never really connected it, but that was an important impetus that got me to say at a certain point, I'm going to bum around Europe for a year,
Hmm.
and decided to follow that joke and ended up in Amsterdam and stayed for 18 years. And I've been here now on and off for
Just a
almost
short
40
stay, right?
years, just a
I'm
short
going to go
stay.
spend a month and hang out, and wow, this is so much fun. I think I'm going to stay here for a while.
Yeah. And I've kind of lived my life in that way is listening to what openings are there, listening to the rhythms, and with a deep sense within myself of that I think I've always had of where can I be of service?
Sure. Now, let's get it into the practical sense because we talk about this, we understand the energy, we understand the flow, We understand the sensitivity. It's the practicality of the definition of the activity that brings that. What did you notice in your jaunt through Europe, let's say, of how you were paying attention, observing the synchronicities, the serendipitous moments, the connections, and how that flow took place? Because I think this is something that we all could use in
Yeah.
order to be able to recognize the breadcrumbs that we need to follow to have a fulfilling life.
Well, I think for me, like I said, I think I'm just wired. I was wired that way to what can I do to be of service? I think
Mhm.
there was that. My background's actually in classical theater and acting. So I have that. And I say, and I was doing semi-professional theater in Manhattan when I was still in high school.
So you
And
had
so
many masks you could put on, eh?
and well, we put the masks on, but what's interesting when I started teaching acting, my first course was called Yourself as Instrument. And that I say that, and this is all intuitive, Zen. I didn't plan this for it. I didn't have a purpose. I just planned it. Just made sense to me that
Sure.
as an actor, you want to start, which is, I didn't realize that that's how spiritual practices also begin. But this idea that if I want to portray someone else, I have to know myself and not realizing that that's the essence of understanding compassion practice.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And so in a sense, I was following these impulses. And I always say that acting is the science of human behavior. So if there's anyone who understands human behavior, it's actors, because that's what they're portraying.
Sure. And the ability to navigate situations, especially tense ones,
Yeah.
comes in that ability to move, to be sensitive, to observe, to understand the behaviors that are present, and then know how to move those into more congruent, even harmonious
Yeah.
situations where that sense of togetherness can emerge.
Well, yes. And in this time when I was in the Netherlands, I also was still practicing my Tai Chi and learning deeper levels of Taoist alchemy and healing.
Mhm.
So understanding Taoism on a deeper level. And here's where I met my Tibetan Buddhist teacher. I've been studying with him now for 30 years. So this all has been part of my evolution. And my very
Right.
first training workshop, not workshop, teaching from the scriptures of Tibetan Buddhism was Lojong, which was the compassion training, cultivating the compassionate heart, bodhicitta. So again, all of these, and then in this time, while I was doing all of these things, I was asked to do a training for KLM called Dealing with Aggression. Again, that just presented itself. And then I started, and just imagine, we're talking about the early 90s, that
Mm,
KLM was already tracking that passengers were getting more aggressive. Can you imagine that where
sure.
we are now?
Right. Well, I
And
just come out of
and
the aerospace industry at that time in America, where in the company that I was working for, I pushed for interpersonal skills classes because
yeah,
the management came to me, asked me how I was doing my job because I was a new kid on the block in a 35 person department, and I sailed to the top of the production charts simply because of how I dealt with people, how I
yeah,
played with people and had fun at work. And, the rest of the guys were like, oh, you're not giving me what I want. I'm going to beat you over the head or I'm going to go to your supervisor. And, that
right.
stuff just doesn't work.
Nope. No, it doesn't work. I mean, well, I would say, because I've been doing this now for quite a long time, it provides a temporary solution. So it's a false illusion that it works,
Temporary and
right?
transitory, absolutely.
But for the long term, and I think that that's what we're facing in the world right now is, and that's the work that I'm doing. It sounds like the work that you're doing and so many are doing, is to see that the temporary solutions are not sustainable.
Hmm.
And that we're now coming up with new strategies and skills and ways of approaching things in life where we have to look at the long-term effects and long-term
Sure.
strategy.
Now, do you see science coming out? You mentioned the Tao earlier. I love the symbol, right? I think
Yeah.
everyone who sees that just kind of is enamored by it. And yet it's a two-dimensional. We don't often, and I think contact brought this out, right? That not everything's two-dimensional. You can fold it and it might actually mean something more, right?
Yeah.
So in looking at that, and these were things that questions I had, right? It was like, okay, what else might that be? Because I was looking into hydrogen at the time, and it's the only one that doesn't fit the Trinity model. And so hydrogen being the bonding agent for our DNA helix, one thing, powers the sun, another thing, most prevalent gas in the universe, third thing, right?
Right.
So in looking at that, I'm thinking, well, if you were to look at the DNA helix from a top-down view, knowing that light pulses are what drive our bus, so to speak,
Hmm.
and what would it look like? Right? So you've got one side on, one side off, and the helix is represented in those two inner circles. And I thought, wow, how interesting. I wonder if that's really true. I don't know,
Mm.
but it certainly sounds plausible, right? Or at least it gives another dimension as to how to see ourselves and maybe understand why these symbols were left originally.
Right. Right. I think what's interesting, what's coming up for me right now is this idea of, we're already there, right? So if we're this evolving into, so you're talking about two-dimensional, three-dimensional, four-dimensional, and
Right.
and more. We're already there. That's my belief. I'm not saying it, I don't know it to
Yeah,
be
we're just
fully true.
unaware. We're
We're
already
just not
there.
aware. That's
Yeah,
all. We're just catching up. The awareness is catching up. I'd say that's a false thing to say. I say it's a false thing. It doesn't, I'm not saying it's true. I'm just saying my truth is that it's a false thing to say, come into the present moment. We're always in the present moment. We
right.
can't not be in the present moment.
We're
What
we're
what has
sometimes
to,
distracted, but we're still
well, we
always
know
present.
our awareness has to catch up to the fact that so it's not, we're always in the present. We just have to help our awareness recognize what it means to embody being in the present.
Yeah,
I guess, on the same thing, we're on all dimensions already. It's just what we're doing. And this for me is like, this is like what you would do with a child. It's a young part of us, I would say. I would speak for myself, that isn't fully grasping that. And how can we have the compassion of a parent to help that part of us catch up?
sure.
Because
But
it's
we have to
scary.
learn to be a parent first. There's kids
Yeah.
raising kids today that, my wife's a piano teacher and she's dealing with parents with young kids and the parents don't seem to really understand the dynamics of child rearing and the the intelligence that's just budding there that just needs the
Yeah.
outlet, right? The multidimensional aspect, I had curiousness about that sometime because of my own experiences. I wondered, and gosh, this is 1988. I was introduced to multiplane awareness technique that William Swigard developed back in the 1950s, and it was a facilitated process that the experiencer would go through 9 planes of consciousness and integrate their bodies on each of those planes,
Hmm.
right? It's way out there, right? It's like, I'm sure the audience is going, what? So here's the interesting thing. When I was preparing for my interview with Jeffrey Mishlove, I was going through some old videos and interviews from him. And I found a guy named Vernon Neppy who was talking about this is kind of long, triadic dimensional distinction vortical paradigm. And so it was there, he and Edward Close had built a theory of everything, quantum physics paper, around the positing of consciousness, space, and time being tethered across 9 dimensions. So you got planes,
Yeah.
dimensions, kind of synonymous. So here's some science now that backs up my experience. Both of them, both the technique and Nepi and Close said, okay, there's more. It's just this is our limitations. This is our human bandwidth that we have available. Well, even, here we are in the third. Imagine if we were aware of the fourth, let alone the fifth and on up, right? What would that give us the capacity to do in that kind
Yeah.
of being? Fascinating.
Yes. It is fascinating. And we're at that point. I mean, I believe that, like from a lot of communities
I
I'm
would
talking
agree.
to, where, and I think that's what we're seeing. I've been saying this now, actually for almost 20 years now in all my lectures. I start with the bad news is that the old structures as we know them are crumbling. The good news is that the old structures as we know them are crumbling.
Right, right.
And that we're in this transition, and that's what we're seeing. We're seeing most people who don't have the grounding and the trust in the process, I guess,
Well, that's
are in a
tough to do, right? Because it's
very tough.
they have to literally let go of their attachments to reality and suspend their belief system completely in
Yeah,
order to have a full experience and allow that curiosity to be
yeah.
reflected in kind.
So as as I was saying earlier, that I do a monthly global heart gathering
Hmm.
online where we're training ourselves to be midwives for a system that's dying away, and midwives for a system that is emerging.
Right,
And it's already emerging. And it's just a question of the media doesn't, the reason why we don't see how much is emerging is because it's not sexy enough for the media, in a sense.
right, right.
And
And yet there's a sense of it beyond everything. Now, I'm curious as to in looking at this, we're in a sense children growing up, right? So we're going back to those early stages of maturation and picking the ball up and moving forward with it. What are the kinds of things that you're noticing are the most impactful, maybe even prevalent in this process that we're having to address in order to have that ascension, if you will?
I think, it's interesting. What's coming to me now is to say, what people are talking about the Aquarian Age, that we're moving into that, and with Pluto moving into Aquarius, and that's a marker of that. And for those who know about astrology, the opposition of that is Leo, which represents in some level the heart. So I think that's where that the more we can balance out the Aquarian, we're developing into a
Mhm.
more global tribe, right? We're
Right.
we're being forced to see our global interconnectedness and interdependence. And I talk
Absolutely.
about that in the Fear Civility book, is that we can see the human family as a heart, the global heart.
Hmm.
And and the global heart's not well at the moment. And that I would say the prognosis is that the reason why it's not well is because it's been feeding on a diet that's technologically overfed and
Right.
spiritually malnourished.
Well, the agenda's been profit over people and planet, and we're flipping the agenda now to people and planet over profit. It's not doing away with
Right.
the profit because we still have to have a ways and means,
Exactly.
although it's going to be adjusting. And
It's it's basically the global heart needs a balanced diet.
Mhm.
So it's not the polarity of one or the other. Of course, we need the technological advances that is going to serve us
Well, yeah,
in
already is.
this, and it is serving us in this global expansion and ascension in a sense. But we have to integrate with an equal balance the heart.
Mhm.
So when you're asking what am I seeing impact, any opportunities that people have to really cultivate, and the fierce ability is a method to cultivate the skills and strategies of the heart. And as we're shifting into a different way of being on this planet, we need new skills and strategies, more upgraded skills and strategies. And it's all about learning not to just have what I call a hallmark cardy sentimental view of love and compassion, but the practical, down to earth, in the dirt,
Right.
messy love and
For
compassion.
instance, let me give you an example. Dealing with, you've got a group of people and a vendor, and there's this challenge. There's an issue that needs to be addressed, and recognizing that the vendor's feeling defensive and triggered, right, because of that, because they want to
Yeah.
perform well. And the others saying, no, okay, wait a minute, we recognize you're feeling defensive. And that's okay, but that's not really what we're about here. We're not trying to attack. It doesn't feel good, does it? No. Okay, so let's not go there. Let's go to the place where we can figure out how to collaboratively
Yeah.
solve this problem together. And it just shifts the entire energy.
Yes. And that is it. It can be that simple.
Yeah.
So I'm just because you've brought up aerodynamics and science, I've worked for 12 years with NASA with the respectful confrontation work. And I always manage to say in the workshop that what we're doing here is not rocket science.
Right.
I found that very funny. They didn't laugh. They didn't laugh.
Uh,
But one time I did a training, one of the directors was there and he said, "Oh, no, Joe, rocket science is easy compared to the science of human behavior, of understanding human behavior."
Because
And it's in those,
numbers are consistent. They're
yeah,
concrete. They say things. You can interpret them differently. However, they're non-emotional.
yeah. And it's in those simple things that we're going to emerge. That's the impetus. It again, it sounds kind of hokey in a way.
Not really.
Um,
There's evidence, right? There's all kinds of calendars that say, hey, here's the time. This is what we're going through. If you pay attention or are curious
yeah,
enough to look at the larger timelines. Um, Mayan Calendar is another one. Jose
yeah,
Arguelles was I don't want to say a close friend, but a friend that I'd known for years. And one of our conversations was about this period, right? Because I was curious, what is all of this Mayan calendar stuff, right? Well, the whole idea is about the evolution of consciousness. The last period, the last 26,000 years, has been in this kind of Kali Yuga state. And
hmm,
now in the escalation of consciousness, the period of that in between the Piscean and the Aquarian Age is a 50-year window. Now he
right,
says it opened in 87, closes in 2037. Well, in this period, there's an escalation of consciousness and awareness. That the apex was the solstice of 2012. Then after that, what happens? Well, you've got the awareness, the consciousness, you carry it with you everywhere, right? Harv Eker says, what you do anywhere, you do everywhere. So you've got this, whether you're conscious of it or not. You're carrying it everywhere. What's that do? It changes the subtle energy everywhere you go. What's that do? Well, it rises things that aren't congruent to the surface for review.
right.
Now look at what's happening with the world since 2012 and especially since 2015, 2016, right? All of these things that are incongruent with our natural order, which is to love and be loved,
Hmm.
they're all rising to the surface for examination, and some are taking charge and doing what they feel is necessary to help boost it, all of which are helpful. We may not experience it as such initially, and yet by remaining non-attached to it and just doing what's in front of us to do, we all get through it better.
Yeah. And that's really it, and then who said that? Hey, we're all walking each other home. Was that Ram Dass?
Yes.
And that's the compassion part of it. So to me, the answer is the heart, and then the concrete manifestation of that. I say compassion in action,
Hmm.
and uh,
Now,
and and yeah,
I was going to say from the Taoist back to the heart, in that the Taoist perspective, right? There's um, what's desirable and what's undesirable. And it's that simple. And the heart basically would give you that opportunity to sense how you feel in that moment and do the appropriate things to move that into a better place or acknowledge the good place that it's into,
yeah.
right? So how does that in your work, how do you manage that? What would the childlike attitude be towards shifting that?
Um, I, I'll give you. I'm bringing up NASA again. That in almost every training I gave, or I hear this often, not only at NASA, that at the end of the training, I'll ask, What's your biggest takeaway? It's
Hmm.
not other people do it, but and one of the main things that I heard was What I'm taking away is that I never considered that some of the problems I'm having with my colleague, that I'm contributing to that problem. To me, that my work is done,
Indeed.
right? They don't, right,
Absolutely.
right? So, to plant those seeds with someone for the first time to consider that I might be contributing to some of my suffering is from because then they're going to shift something within themselves. Hopefully,
Absolutely.
that's going to influence the people
Well, their
around them.
perspective has changed, right?
Yeah,
They're now saying, oh, gosh, I have a part in creating my own reality.
right. And then to take it further, with the fear civility work is considering why are we having so much external polarization? Like
Hmm.
we're in a sense like we've never on some levels seen before. Well, the the most effective way to resolve that is to look at your own internal polarizations. What are your own false polarities? I talk about polarization as being stagnant because in a sense it's like two rams ramming. Rams will never do this. Rams, what they do, it's quite beautiful and powerful and on some level loving and playful, is
Yeah.
they'll ram each other. The sound, you're like, I can't believe they're doing that and they haven't knocked themselves out. They ram and then they shake it out. They get disoriented and then they get reoriented and they come back. And that's the metaphor I have with how we're communicating. We get this we like I'm right, no I'm right, and we get disoriented and we get stuck in that disorientation.
And with the
And
codependence, right? We have this notion or idea how other people think we should be, and we try to emulate that.
well, that's I don't know if you had a chance to look at my TEDx talk. It's called A Cure for Chronic Niceness. So what's causing a lot of the stress in the world right now and the problems is the extremes of either being totally passive or chronically nice,
Hmm.
or being aggressive or a bully.
Politically correct, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. All of that, all of it,
Yeah.
and not speak up because it might rock the boat. And and what we're seeing play out is what's unfolding now is people who are stuck in the polarity of I only have two choices, either being nice and passive or a bully and aggressive. And that what fear civility does is it cracks that open and says there are more possibilities.
Here's a tertiary choice you weren't aware of.
And it
Man.
breaks it open. It breaks it open. And so it helps us see the inner pole, and so when the rams are not doing the healthy thing of ramming and then disorienting and coming back, and that actually helps them grow their antlers. All right, that's their horns. There's
Mhm.
growth in that. There's growth and deepening of relationship in respectful confrontation. But when we get stuck in this, I'm right, it's stagnant. And
Yeah.
so much energy we're seeing resources and talent and energy being wasted in trying to just gain like a little bit of like in American football, a yard or two.
Well, think of the construction industry, right? I did partnering workshops for multi-million dollar construction projects for a decade and a half. And man, these are some of the most aggressive, egocentric, my way or the highway kind of guys. And yet, what's important is bringing it all to the focus of the specs of the job. They have
Right.
to meet it. The job is the boss, and everybody wins that way.
Yeah.
Now, to
Right.
get that through, it's like, okay, so my agenda doesn't matter. No, it matters. It's just ancillary, right? So what do you do on this that needs support in order to work with the rest of the team? It could be, these were all stakeholders, managers, supervisors, owners, utilities, fire, our Department of Defense sometimes, and
Yeah.
Homeland Security, all those kinds of folks. And how do you bring those together? Well, once you get that central focus and you have a paradigm shift in that look, right? Then
Yeah.
everybody just kind of relaxes and is like, oh, okay, then all we need to do is just look at the job fulfillment specs and adhere to those and work things out, which are what we did in the sessions, we did the conflict resolution, right? Or
Right.
usually it was an issue on the job that was going to happen 2 to 5 year schedules, right? So they know when things are going to happen. They aren't prepared for it yet. So we flush those things out in the meeting and create an action plan of who's responsible for what, by when, given to whom, and distributed however, right?
Right.
So that when those moments occurred in the schedule, there was no work stoppage. They had a plan.
Right. There's flow. You
Yeah.
got the system back to flow, the organism. Yeah, and that's so that the subtitle of my book, Fear Civility, is transforming our global culture from polarization to lasting peace. And I bring that up to say that, and it's all skills and strategies of how to
Mhm.
break the stagnation of polarization to get on the path. And I offer a 6-step pathway of hope to get to lasting peace. But one of the key skills are pivots, right? So
Right.
you name that. So and I offer where we get stagnated, where we get stuck in our polarization, mostly internal, and then offer a pivot to break out of it. So in your example is a beautiful example. You are in the stagnation, and basically on some level you use one of my pivots, because the stagnation that was being used was I'm right, and if you have a different view, you must be wrong.
Hmm.
And I think we're seeing that play out, Zen, is what we're seeing is that people, as long as people, the need to be right is more important than the need for solutions, we're never
Right.
going to see changes.
What is
So
it in
the
marriage?
pivot,
What is, right or happy? Which do you want?
yeah, so I say the pivot of that is do you want to be right or do you want to be effective?
Yeah.
And that's what you're naming. It's like, come on, everyone, you may think you're right and you may think you're right. But in the end, we have to get this project done. So what can you put that aside for now and see if there, because then you'll find, and I see this all the time, when someone says to me, I disagree, I'll say, what parts of what I said do you disagree with? What do you
Hmm.
mean? Said, well, let me start with a different question. Do you disagree with me 100% in everything I said? And then they take a moment and say, no, actually, it was just that one point. So basically, only 5% of what I said you didn't agree with? Correct. So by saying you disagree, you just discounted everything I said. So that's already a shift. So let's now look at that one part that you don't agree with. Let's discuss it. And then we can come up in that discussion. We have specific ways of coming up with something that hasn't even been born yet.
Well, yeah. Well, then you got to communicate, right? And you know as well as I do, the number one fear on the top of the list is what? Public speaking.
Oh, yeah.
So when that's above death, dying, divorce, right? Um, what do you do with that? Right? You've got to learn to open your mouth and not feel like you're going to be diminished. And
Yeah.
in traditional environments, that's generally what happened. You would open your mouth and immediately be dismissed.
Right. Well, and I would say that, you raise the stakes, you have more to lose when what you want to speak of, you feel like you need to be right and to convince everyone,
Right.
as opposed to like when another pivot is my truth does not equal the truth.
Hmm.
If we can really get that, then we cultivate courageous self-reflection. We cultivate more independent critical thinking, and
And
we
look,
can
I see it
find
this
common
way.
ground.
I'm not sure if you do. This is my perspective. What do you think?
And that's all we can possibly do,
Yeah.
unless we have already reached that state that we talked about earlier of some of the, some great beings on this planet who are all seeing, who can see it all. If we haven't reached that state, then it's kind of arrogant of us to say, I'm right,
Right.
without questioning that you're not capable of seeing it all. You're not capable in this moment of seeing the truth.
Right. Well, when
You're
you just
only
consider
capable.
the multidimensional perspective we spoke of earlier, right? There are so
Exactly.
many other things that we're unaware of, can't see, let alone experience. So where does that leave us here? And again, the self-deprecation tends to want to kick in at that point, which doesn't serve us either. We just
No.
I don't know, and it's okay.
And how exciting, I have something new to learn.
Yeah.
And that kind of mindset is what I'm trying to hold on to, and what I'm trying to train people to be in, because I believe all the solutions are there. They just haven't landed yet, right?
Mhm.
And they're trying to find their way in. But in a rigid vessel, it's not going to come in. So the more we can loosen up and become in our balance and flow, and be in emergent flow with each other, then the solutions to all of our world problems will be born. They'll be here. There's no way of holding them back. It's a
Totally
matter
agree.
of training ourselves to get into that state.
Well, in training or not, I think we're evolving regardless, right?
Yeah.
And whether we're being kicked, dragged, screaming, whatever, it's still moving forward. So wouldn't you rather, you know, enjoy yourself a little more and right, have some happiness and fulfillment, and those things are so easy to have, and yet we put so many things in the way through our own self-limiting thoughts and
Yeah.
behaviors.
Yeah.
Now, how do
Yeah.
we move into that grander space that, hey, I am, and the rest is possibility, right? Kind of back to what Jesus said, I am, and that's it, right? So where do we want to go with that? That leaves us a tremendous amount of creative capacity to make choices.
Right. Yes.
Now, do you find that in this, looking at it from a systems and process standpoint now, do you notice that the skill sets developed throughout the lifetimes of individuals who then recognize that, oh, I need to make a shift in my life. Otherwise, I'm going to end up really unhappy or dead, right? And, or both. And so, how do we shift that perspective into this new living awareness that we have this information available, that our curiosity can be answered when we learn how to ask and shut up, right?
Yeah.
But how does that process, what do you see it being in the evolution of what's happening, and taking those skill sets that have been developed and then applying them in a new way in this paradigm shift?
Yeah. I think the first thing is to give us all a break. That's another one of the pivots, is to give each other a break. Things have accelerated so fast in the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So fast
Three
in our
years with AI. I mean, come on.
3 years. Yeah.
This is just a
So sorry. So just to give us a break, and to put it in perspective. I don't we haven't seen yet. That's going to take another 50 to 100 years to see the studies of the effect of personal computers on human beings. It's only 30 years, or 30, 35 years, that people have personal computers, and then the internet and social media. We don't know yet the impact it's going to have. It is having on us, and will continue to have on us. It's all so new. When you look at the 4 billion years of the evolution of this planet. And so I think that's the first step, and things have moved very quickly. And to me, the answer is always other, right? So what I would say, that the 50s and the 60s was, this is a very general way of looking at it, particularly in European and North American Western cultures, was an awakening, a breaking out of conformity, and for the first time, like personal discovery in a sense. The 70s was a cosmic exploration of that. The 80s and the 90s was self-discovery and working on our wounds and working on ourselves. And I feel that after those number of decades, the time has come for more of us to take what we've learned in the retreat centers, and give it back to others. Give it back
sure.
to the planet, give it back to others. That the 21st century is about other, and
Well,
about
yeah, being on the mountain doesn't matter anymore. You got to be with people, and because that's where things happen. People are how things happen.
yeah.
can't do it without them. And the more cooperative and collaborative the process, the better the results.
Yeah. So that's what we're discovering, and for me, that's the answer. In a world system that's doing such a good job of keeping us dysregulated, and depleted and feeling powerless and feeling isolated and alone, I say the most revolutionary thing, radical revolutionary thing rebellious thing we can do is take care of ourselves and cultivate skills that keep us the hard-heartedness to soften and to commit to deepening and cultivating relationships. That is the most radical thing we can do now, because and that is where our obligation is in what's evolving. And for me, because of the polarization, because of silos, that a key part of the work is understanding that the key to our solution to what's emerging is to find new alliances in surprising places.
Absolutely. And I think, hoping anyway, the work that I'm doing with planetary citizens and breaking down the co-creation wheel, the 12 sectors of society that have been operating mainly as silos,
Yeah,
and yet with all of the research study, available information, and reality that's not being spoken about, we have enough resources to take care of everyone.
yeah,
We're not in a scarcity situation, which is what has been promoted for so long. That's an adversarial one. The oneness, we got everything, we just need to distribute it better, which falls back into our leadership and how those systems are crafted to be more respective of the ways and means to provide for people, because we're on one planet. We got, one air, water, land, right? We got to learn how to share the resources. Otherwise, we're,
yeah,
fall into a default, which is back to the old, conflict resolution kind of things that just don't make sense anymore, frankly.
yeah. It doesn't make sense, so we need new skills. We need upgraded skills and we need to take a closer look at our own habits,
Hmm.
viewpoints, habits, and patterns. I did this. I led a group through a meditation once of saying, because everyone I find can say very easily, we're all one. And I hear that a lot, particularly in spiritual communities. But what does that actually
How's it
imply?
work,
How
right?
does it
What's
work?
neat? How's
Because,
it work?
right. And I led them through meditation. So if we're all one, then that has to imply we're not separate. If we're not separate, that has to imply that we're all interdependent and interconnected. If we're all interdependent and interconnected, that means we are in alignment with not only our loved ones, but strangers and adversaries. If we are in alignment with loved ones, strangers, and adversaries, then every pain and suffering that every human being or creature is feeling, we will feel. If we feel every pain from every creature on this planet, there would be no hunger, right? That's mapping it right there.
Yep,
So if you say we're all one, please do the map.
sure. Well,
So
and
that,
here's going back to some ancient materials, right? The Vedas, 15,000 years ago, written in Sanskrit. The gist of them are we're all divine threads incarnate, connected to source,
yeah,
capable of God consciousness. Now, what's that mean? We're available to that infinite intelligence specific to our individuality and how it fits.
yeah. And how glorious that is.
Isn't it?
It's glorious.
When
And if
you
we, yeah,
and how do we now, because we're in the process, you and I and others like us, we're in the process of figuring it out
oh
through
yeah, I'm
not
figuring it out.
only intellectually, but living it, right? Which is that's where the rubber really meets the road. Because this is all, it's a beingness. We get caught up in the doo-doo and we get stuck. We forget that it's the being that needs to arrive first. Now, how does that understanding trickle through in organizational structures where there's a lot of processes and procedures and all of the kinds of things that can initiate conflict, and yet we want to avoid that as much as possible. Some conflict's good. It's necessary when you're curious and the two different aspects of exploiting and expanding, right? Where organizations get stuck and they forget one or the other. Well, that
Yeah.
balanced approach is the exploitation and the expansion. So how do you find in your work that this can be brought to bear in an organization and or with communities?
Yeah, with computer. So I see I see an organization, I see a community, a family, a human being as an organism. It's all organisms. And in the same way, like learning neuroscience, how does an organism, which is a microcosm of a macrocosm, right? The whole ecosystem. So
Right.
when you approach it from that way, it's a living, breathing organism, every company, every organization. And, my work is creating cultures of mutual empowerment, which is shifting the work culture for lasting change. So all my work is based on somatics. It's not theory. It's all, as I said, taking ideas into action, helping companies
You say
understand
addicts,
that
visceral experience of it.
visceral experience, that and another pivot in my work is people don't change, they transform.
Mhm.
Right. So that's where we get stuck and people suffer, and where organizations fail is that we come up with a policy, we expect everyone can change, or in government or in a family unit or we're in communities, we implement a policy and we don't take the time to have the compassion and the curiosity to support someone psychologically through that transition.
Right.
And that's where the disconnect is. And so I'll go into an organization and I'll borrow from what I've learned so much from Chinese healing and energy work is to get a system to thriving. You first have to see where the system is out of balance. Then you
Mhm.
restore the balance. You create a system that maintains stability, and with the restoration of balance and maintaining stability, you create a foundation for thriving. And that the notice the most challenging and
Not
messy work,
sustainability, thriveability, right?
thrivability.
There's a huge difference there because the distinction being we've been all of the mm, science and concern and the climate change and all this kind of stuff has been about sustainability. And so the focus has been about avoiding or fixing or retarding or it seems kind of retarded if you ask me, because they were not looking at, okay, how do we thrive? How do we get to a place where we are operating as one? We understand it intellectually that it's there. How do we
Right,
step into that?
right. Yes. And that a thriving system is a system where the individual is durable, is resilient, and where the interpersonal connections are resilient. And resilience, of course, means that they're strong and flexible, right?
Right.
And that's because then, and that's a lot of the resilience work with individuals and companies is how do you create an internal foundation or scaffolding so that when the external storms come, they can withstand the storm.
Sure.
And
No,
yeah,
for education, and yeah, we got to weather the storms, right? No matter what, whatever trials and tribulations come, we need to be able to move beyond them. Now, from a structural standpoint, in that educational process, right, the assessment of where an individual is at at the beginning. We often, one of the things I admire so much about the Russian educational culture, at least the Soviet, I'm not sure what it is now. My wife was a piano pedagogue that was trained in
mm,
the Soviet system, and they got her at 5 years old. They did an assessment. Okay, what's your skill set? What's your attitude? What your aptitude is? Okay, so based on what we found, you got two strands you can go in, either gymnastics or piano. She chose piano. She went through the educational system as a pedagogue, which is far more than just a teacher, and graduated from one of the most prestigious music schools in the world as a result.
Mm.
Now,
Hmm.
we don't do that in America. We still have to, in order to take someone anywhere, we have to first figure out where they're at, right?
Yes.
And then be able to design ways for them to ascend on their own with support. Now, how do
Yes.
you see that happening? Because this is a critical factor, even in HR, that's avoided, right? We've got the DISC, we've got the Colby, we've got the Myers-Briggs, we've got all this kind of stuff, and human design even now. And yet, how do we structure it so that these tools can be used effectively to nurture the whole?
I think it's shifting. I think it is shifting. And I think the millennials and the Gen Zs will not let us get away with it anymore the way we've been doing it, right? Because for them, it's very much what me, really starts with them outward. I hope that doesn't come across as a judgment, but that's my observation
Well,
is that,
self-love first, right? And self-love is not judgmental. It's taking care of yourself before you can do anything for anybody else.
and I think that, and I talk about 20th century leadership was hierarchical, where there was a lot of structure top down. And I say 21st century is becoming more circular, where everyone is at the table, but 21st century leadership doesn't mean that it's consensus. It does mean that you're an effective leader if you take the time to hear the perspective of everyone involved, because everyone has a different reflection. That goes back to what you were saying about the Vedas, right? Every human being has their unique contribution to shine divinity to one another, right? We have our own unique. So in a sense, in an organization, is the same thing. Every person at different sectors from the organization will have information necessary to make the most informed choice.
And Dee
So
Hock did a great job of illustrating the chaotic organizations to begin with, the flat line, right? Where you've got the tasks, you've got the skill sets, and they find each other.
yeah, so I think that is emerging where I think that it's going to be more that sense of, and I talk about that an important part of to resolve our issues and to get to more collaborative buy-in and to get to a culture of lasting peace. It starts with meeting people where they are. If you want to take people on a path of transformation, because in a sense, I always say that with the work I've done around the world with women's rights groups in the Middle East, is that if you want to see people shift their way of treating one another, they're not going to change, they're going to transform. And what transforms are viewpoints, habits, and patterns.
Mhm.
People will not transform their viewpoints, habits, and patterns voluntarily if you're not creating an environment of safety and trust.
Right.
That brings us right back to the compassion of a parent, right? Of this, and so meeting people where they are is saying, I'm not asking you to be something different than you're not, because I think that's what we're seeing play out a lot in the world. Is I'm asking you to be something you're not, and they're like, I'm not doing that. Who are you to say that? But to say, I see where you are, and I have a vision of where we can go. Are you willing to go on the journey with me?
Yeah. Yeah. It's a sense that, you provide the psychological safety and
Yeah,
intellectual humility to be able to nurture that relationship.
yeah. And that's what's going to help us all shift into a consciousness that we're already in. There's just the part of us that hasn't caught up yet.
So, what are the kinds of things that generally we can do as an individual, as a person, regardless of where we're at? Because, like, again, what Harv Eker says, what you do anywhere, you do everywhere. Um, what can we do to help boost our awareness?
I think it's doing as we're saying, is if you believe these concepts of we are all one, if you believe in love and compassion, is to just check yourself on a moment-to-moment basis. Was how much of my thoughts are really love and compassion? How many of my words is really love and compassion? And how many of my actions? And if you can start transforming your thoughts, words, and actions into love and compassion, then you be compassion.
Hmm.
You are compassion in action. That's the process. It sounds very simple, but I often say is that the problems are very complex, but you can't solve complicated problems with complicated solutions. It just complicates it. The solutions are really very simple.
Very simple. Yeah,
Implementing the simple solutions is hard work.
very much so, because it counters the frustration, pain, suffering, trauma that is often brought into situations that are the inhibiting factors. Because there's this whole history or herstory, depending, that's brought into an environment that has to be, we can't separate ourselves, right? The old
Yeah,
adage, well, you leave work at work and home at home. You're one person. That's impossible.
yeah,
So to finally recognize that and realize, oh, there are other aspects of our lives that we have to help nurture because they're affecting our thoughts, behaviors, and actions.
yeah. Yeah. So that's the internal work. And I would say a fun game to play is to do, and this is the meditation I do in the Global Heart Gathering, is to do an inventory. Who are your loved ones? Who would you consider loved ones on your list of 8 billion people on the planet? And to approximate a number, people closest to you. Who are your adversaries? And approximate a number. Now, who are your strangers? And I'm going to guess for most of us that the number of strangers on our list is close to 8 billion, certainly more than 7 billion. So for me, there's not a single day that can go by that you could not take a moment to connect with a stranger.
Yeah.
And that can, and it doesn't mean you have to give them a hug. Doesn't, you don't have to really truly engage, but even if you're sitting on a bus, to just give that person a blessing or to smile. If more of us connect, made a mission to find alliances in surprising places, to engage with more strangers, invite them into our loved ones category,
Hmm.
then we will see a shift on the planet.
Yeah. Yeah. And another example is that, you walk into a room and you happen to catch somebody's eye. Well, that's an indication that there is a flow of energy there that ought to
Exactly.
be explored. So go do it, right? Most of us are like, we're oblivious, right? You catch an eye, oh well, you're on to the next person or whatever. Therein
Yeah.
is that awareness perspective you're talking about of stepping back, observing, and being closer to the heart, no rush intended, and every rush intended, that this process then can unfold. Because I guarantee you explore it, you're going to have an amazing experience, even if it's only for that short time. Because we tend to,
Yeah.
and would you agree that we tend to, when we have those experiences, we tend to want to extend them instead of
Exactly.
just recognizing it's a moment, embrace it, and then move on.
I see it the same way. And and again, if you look at it from the game of, wow, there's 7 billion plus people, I don't have the time to stay attached to one person. I've got to move on in a sense. And that's following the impulse, because that's the other thing is how much are we in relationship with what's unfolding around us and how do we dance with that, right? And and then you feel, if you're intuitive enough, you'll feel that was a moment, it's 10 seconds and it's over and you move on.
Right.
But if that moment, if that situation calls for more attention, you follow it until it doesn't.
Now, sensitivity, you bring up something I find just really fascinating because I go to the major depths with that about our bodies,
Yeah.
right? Our bodies are transceivers. We're not taught to recognize them. You speak to the heart. There's a indigenous philosophy. It's called the three brain system, the gut, the heart, and the head.
Yep.
First brain is the gut. It's connected to all the vibrations. The chakra system edifies that. The heart is the Tao, right? Desirable or undesirable. It's the second brain. It's where we choose, at least have an indicator of what to do with it. And then we move into the head, which is the third brain, which allows us to make more appropriate choices based on paying attention to more clear information.
Right. Yes.
Now, in that process, do you find that the level of sensitivity, and I'm going to break that down to the cosmic move through space that we're in, right? We've gone into a new area of space. Many call it the photon belt, or some call it the photon belt, where the vibrational frequency is slightly different, maybe a little higher in a frequency range than it was. That affects us subtly, bringing our own awareness, our own sensitivity, our ability to sense and feel to a higher degree. Now, what do we do with those new things that we sense and feel? That anxiety we feel in the gut may not be anxiety at all. It may be anticipation or a quickening to get ready. Something else is coming. You need to be
Yeah.
aware, right? Where most of us feel that anxiety and we take it to a fear-based place of, oh shit, what's going to happen now, right? And 99% of our fears never manifest. So why do we waste
Mhm.
our time with them? Um, how do we do this, right? Do you see that sensitivity coming up? Is it just a matter of being
Yes.
more aware, bringing out the conversations, allowing it to take place, having exercises that stimulate it? Uh,
Yeah.
I'm sure, yes, all the above. What are the things that you find may be most useful in this process, given that slurry of things I just delivered?
No, it's remarkable what you're saying. Yeah, this is the essence of my work, Zen, actually, is training people to come to the core. I mean, I didn't invent it, but to understand what alignment of head, heart, and core is.
Mhm.
And again, I'm going back to my answer for everything is balance. Is that when we can come into a balanced alignment where all three are equally working together, in balance with equal amount of attention that we're giving to it, then all of our all of our actions will be wise. And because we're so trained in our current culture to be in our heads, we don't have to focus on that. We got that part down. And
Mhm.
there are many of us who are very heart-centered, and you can see it the way I watch body language. You can see the head people, they lead with the head. The heart people are like, hi, like that. And then there
Right.
are people who are too much in their core and their lower chakras who lead from their pelvis in a sense.
Right.
So my work is really focusing on the body and the core to bring that into balance. And then when you can balance the head with the core, certainly, the heart gets naturally activated. And
Mhm.
a lot of it is is giving the people the awareness. And it's for me as well. I'm still discovering this, that the body has a vocabulary. The body is always giving you wise information. It can't not. The heart is always giving you wisdom. The body is always giving you wisdom.
And it's all connected. It's all connected.
Yeah.
I was so, my life's been kind of a cosmic mystery of sorts. I feel like I've been on the magical mystery tour for the majority
Hmm.
of it. And meeting my wife for the first time, it was an interesting, uh, all kinds of indicators leading up to it, dreams, visions, people, places, things. And I met her at her, of all places, Kundalini yoga teacher training graduation.
Oh, okay.
So that gives you an idea of where the balance in this woman the understanding of the depths of, because
Remarkable.
Kundalini really goes deep into the understanding of the chakra system and the energy and focus and merging that oneness with
Yeah.
the being, right? Perfect partner, because this has been my life as well. And it
Wonderful.
just, it only took 59 years to find her.
And you found her. That's wonderful.
And I found her. And
That's
life just
wonderful.
exploded after that. It's just amazing what a perfect partner, and we all have them. Sometimes we latch hold of people thinking, "Oh, this is my soulmate," because you have that sacral, right, attraction, and you
Right.
don't recognize that it's just sacral, and you got to come up, you got to get in your gut and your heart, right? And otherwise, if that's not there, it's only going to be short term, and you're going to learn what you need to from them in order to advance to the next, hopefully,
Yeah.
or you can get stuck. That's your choice too, right?
Hmm.
How do you see these kinds of relationship factors coming in where there's more knowledge, acknowledgement, and maybe even efforts to bridge that inner and outer world with the resonance of a partner that's more designed to fit your energy as well, for you both to fit, because there's a
Yeah.
mutual attraction there, if you will, or resonance.
Well, I think I said that the answer is the other, right? If one person could have transformed this world, that would have happened. So, it's always about coming into connection and resonance,
Hmm.
and to find, one or to that small circle, not only about a lover, but just about the small circle of people that where you ignite each other, you inspire each other, and you're also fiercely honest with each other, right? You can have
And you have
the
to prepare
necessary,
for that. You got to be fiercely
yeah,
honest with yourself first. You
right,
got to
right,
find that essence of self-love to be blatantly honest with yourself, not
yeah,
judgmental,
no,
just honest. Just
compassion and
honest.
curiosity,
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly. Um, and then the rest of it just seems to happen. Now, for me, it took a bit longer because I had a practice marriage and I got kind of wonky about what I thought relationships ought to be. And then I realized, oh, well, the relationships are on the ocean of emotion and we're all just seeking safe harbor.
Beautiful. So could you interpret what you're saying, that you get out of your head and into your heart?
I think it was more a merging of the three, being
Right.
sensitive, aware, and observant
Yeah.
and curious.
And following impulses.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um,
Which animals do all the time, right? Most creatures
sure.
on this planet do it all the time.
Well, you begin to recognize you begin to recognize certain impulses, right?
Yeah.
Some of them aren't healthy,
No.
right? They only lead you to a certain place and that's it. However, when you begin to at least look for that, because you can feel it, you can sense it in your
Yeah.
body when you begin to pay attention.
Yeah.
And this is all part of that inner development that has to take place before the outer can change. And it
And it's
does
happening.
dramatically in process.
Yeah. And it's always process. I don't think there's an end result. I don't even know what that would look like in a sense.
Everything,
And
and that's the cool thing to think about, right? Everything's just a process.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
so releasing, right?
Well, if Mother Earth can sit around for 4 billion years doing what she's doing, we could
Absolutely.
learn a little bit there. And I think that's really what it is that, from what I hear from a lot of circles, that she's evolving, she's raising her frequency. And
Well, that's the area of space, right? It's a natural. And when you think about it, we are the earth. The earth,
yeah,
stardust, right? Everything that we eat, it's from the earth. So these are all things that there's so much interconnectedness that
yeah,
we are taking for granted. We don't even think about.
yeah,
What if we did?
yeah.
What could you offer that on an individual basis and a moment to moment, something that might, I started to say trigger. I don't necessarily want to pull one. I'm game, just don't shoot me, right? Uh, would you be able to offer something that can be a benefit, a simple thought or an activity or something that a person can use on a daily basis when they begin to catch themselves?
I think an important message for me is like I talk about the six-step pathway of hope.
Hmm.
I think we're in a moment right now where a lot of people are losing hope. Um, and in fact, there was a Gallup study that just came out recently where they questioned, they asked workers from 52 different countries from different demographics, what do you need from your leaders? 56% said hope.
Mm.
So, and I'm not talking about a false aspiration of hope. I'm talking about something that's very real and practical that brings about manifestation.
Yeah, here's what we could do. Here's the plans to get there. Want to help?
And hope for me is, yeah, and hope is about activating possibility. So if there's one thing I think we can do is do our own internal practice of what if we're losing hope, what can we do to activate hope again? And it's what I call become catalysts of fierce hope. How can we be catalysts of fierce hope to whoever we're engaging with in some way, be fierce hope so we can activate in them their own sense of hope.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And so well played, Joe.
Mm.
I thank you so much for the time we've had today. This has been just a wonderful jaunt into collective awareness and shared space.
It's been remarkable. Thank you. Thank you for taking me on this journey. It's been a joy.
It's been a joint journey. We took it, we locked arms and we went together.
We did.
Right? That's the great thing about it. So thanks so much, Joe. I appreciate it. And namaste and inlock cats. Thank you all for sticking with us for this episode of One World in a New World. And by all means, don't forget to go to planetarycitizens.net and pick up your copy of Planetary Citizens Awakening the Heart of Humanity. It offers that hope we just spoke about. So do that. It'll be good for you. Thanks again for Joe and I, and I'll see you next time.